Hey y'all, hope you're doing good today. So in today's message, I want to share some insights that largely just came to me, but it's always interesting to me when I feel like God puts something on my heart, and then afterwards I read something and it aligns with the message. So I'm excited to share a little bit from this book that I just got. I got it used, but pretty interesting so far. And so I've read through chapter 1, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit out of this. And then also just a short little quotation from this other book that I bought, used also. So I hope you enjoy that. But the theme of today's message, which I hope, which is my hope for all of my messages that I share with you all, I hope that you get a lot out of it. Several different even aha moments, revelations, but the overarching theme is one of where do we make our home? What do we consider to be our home, and how that is really, really important as far as our quality of life. And so again, I just really hope you enjoy the message. So I want to start by pointing out a very important distinction between people. It's kind of like a dividing line. It's sort of like this, what comes to mind is the sword of truth, or just the dividing sword that's mentioned in the Bible, kind of like separating the wheat and the is it chaff, the wheat and the weeds, whatever it is, right? That dividing sword is powerful, and I feel like that concept in general can be applied to a lot of different things: the truth versus falsehood, lies, and also just a great distinction between how we live our life. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So what is this distinction? And this can even be a distinction in your life, which we'll discuss as far as the different stages of your own life, and that point of change, of transition, is in spirituality often referred to as being reborn, the rebirth, right? Being new, made new. And so this distinction is, as far as I have come to understand it, a matter of consciousness. And the distinction is our awareness, being awake. And so we're going to look into that, what it means, how it affects us, and how that relates to what we consider to be our home. So I hope you enjoy the message today. All right. So in this first chapter of the Joseph Campbell book that I shared with you all here, he's talking about, within the whole first chapter, the evolution of humanity's conscious awareness, and how it was handled differently in the past. And he gives, a lot of supporting details and evidence for that, and then how it has evolved into today. That's the piece that we're going to be talking about, right? And so, and I want to make just a side note. He makes a lot of statements in here, and even in his other book I've got, about his own personal spiritual beliefs. And I feel like, you don't have to throw, I guess the old saying is, throw the baby out with the bathwater, just because you don't perfectly align 100% with another person's beliefs. So I ask you to not totally dismiss my messages or anyone else's on the basis of one factor. And I understand that it can be an important factor that can create or contaminate or create a bias in the whole entire message. Like, I get that piece too, but it's sort of like, this is how I approach life. I think that when you are on the truth-seeking path and you have a genuine desire to learn and grow, right? I think that you're sort of approaching life from an open-minded stance. And in doing so, you can still be rooted and grounded in your core value system and your beliefs. And I feel like a lot of people almost operate more closed-minded because they're afraid that anything out there is going to hijack that or sabotage that, steal it away from them. And I feel like, and I don't know that I've ever really been that way. I started to say I was probably like that in the past, but my belief is that if you can't question something, then how true is it? How strong, how relevant is it? I think that anything of substance should be able to pass any kind of test that it comes across. And so personally, I'm not afraid to, to just approach life open-minded in that manner, and it served me very well, because it's I've learned a lot, and it's actually deepened my convictions as far as my spiritual beliefs as well. So there's that. So I just invite you, no matter what your beliefs are, to just listen with an open mind, right? Okay, so again, this whole first chapter in this book is primarily about humanity's approach to mindfulness and awareness, conscious awareness over time, and how we can study the old remnants left over from various cultures and ancient civilizations that are just long gone. We can kind of study what they left to us. And so the major theme is this. This is what I got from it. In the past, there was a great reverence or a very deep respect for all of life. Animals, the land, one another, the great mysteries. And I feel like, as opposed to today, just taking that one example of the great mysteries, it's kind of like, I feel like people today are reluctant to admit that there even are any mysteries. It's kind of like you'll be mocked, that you haven't done your research and found the facts on whatever. Take any topic, just take your pick. And I think that this change that we've seen over time with regards to humanity's approach to conscious awareness and mindfulness, what has happened to that and where we are today is in direct alignment with this growing spirit of narcissism. And so, and I hate to use a catch-all term because you can just break that down. I think a lot of times that term is used when really the more appropriate term would be wolf in sheep's clothing or psychopath, or and then there's other areas where that's a very appropriate term. So it's just kind of hard to, again, I view language as limiting, but anyway. But I see the abandoning of ceremonial traditions from these old cultures, which again, their main purpose seemed to be to bring mindfulness, right? I think that the abandoning of these ceremonies is possibly our biggest issue today. And so, and I say that because of this. Without mindfulness, there is no true understanding of things. I think that you have to be mindful to have the understanding to be able to get there, right? And again, the Bible says understanding, wisdom, and furthermore, understanding is the principal thing. You might translate that as the purpose of this life. If that's our principal thing, the main goal, that has to be our main goal, which would translate over into the main purpose of our life right there, right? So mindfulness to me is a prerequisite. It's just a non-negotiable prerequisite, right? And I would say furthermore, and we're going to kind of keep this next piece that I'm going to share with you all in the back of your mind as we go through the discussion. I would say furthermore, without understanding, there can be no reverence, right? I think they kind of go hand in hand. It's kind of like if you don't really respect something, it's because you don't really understand it. And you don't, if you don't understand it, you can't have the respect. It just goes together. So I feel like in today's modern society, and the signs are everywhere, if you just kind of get out of your head and just look at what's in front of you. I feel like today we're sort of left just sort of like orphans, like abandoned children, to figure it all out without proper guidance. And that's what those ceremonial traditions and just ceremonies and rituals and everything provided these ancient cultures and civilizations. It provided guidance, and it did it in such a way, a lot of times through the ceremonies and symbolism and the costumes and the dances and the singing and everything that was a part of it. It did it in such a way to make it stick with the youth. Typically it was like initiatory type stuff, you know, like what they call rites, initiatory rites, R-I-T-E-S, right? So let me start with just a short tiny little quote that is in the first part of this chapter. This, if you have the book, it's going to be on page 14, and he's talking about the symbolism in animals. He says the stag loses his antlers annually, but he brings them back again, and so is an incarnation of the forest spirit. Any animal that has an annual cycle, for instance, the peacock losing his tail feathers, becomes symbolic of the process that moves the seasons. The process that moves the seasons. And so he goes into, you know, the cave drawings and the imagery that we have left that we can study and what it means. And on that note, I have this really cool, let me see if I brought them. I'll drop a picture in here. I'm almost positive I did. Here they are. I bought these really cool little cards, and I bought them because I love, you know, to study archetypal symbolism, and it's combined with beautiful art. And so each of these cards has like a little animal, and then historically what that animal has represented on it. And I would share them, but and I may still, but I'm not sure, you know, how many I'll share or whatnot. I always try to be respectful of the creators as far as that goes, but they're really cool. And as an artist, honestly, I'm considering making my own cards, art cards. You know, I've shared my Buddha Doodles cards with you all. Just really cool. And so, yeah. But so he's talking all about animal symbolism. And let me just make a note here. I personally don't believe in the worshiping of creation over the creator, right? And that's not a judgmental, it's not meant to be a judgmental statement. It's just my personal belief system. But to me, associating a symbol with a meaningful reminder is just a practice of mindfulness. It's a practice you can engage in of mindfulness. And it's not the same as making it an idol, right, to be worshipped. But today, in general, we lack those traditions that served as instructions or guidance for the youth from the elders. And we also lack the reminders that come from those traditions for mindfulness. And so let's go ahead and shift our focus. It's going to tie in together, that's my hope, to the theme of home. Okay, so I had a message come to me. I think it was early this morning, kind of when I was in between that dream state and sleep state, you know, when you're kind of just first waking up. It feels sort of like a numinous time as far as my experiences. But I had this message come to me, which is that home is not a place, but a space. It's a space. And so now I want to share more from this book. And this is going to be coming, this excerpt from page 18 and page 19. All right, so he says, the whole idea of the men's sacred ground, the men's cave, which caves were utilized a lot in these rituals and initiatory rites and everything, right? The whole idea, he says, of the men's sacred ground or the men's cave is continued in ceremonial huts, which are associated with rebirth. We're talking about creating that threshold, right? Presenting that before the youth. And he explains the symbolism of it, of the structure. He says you enter the tiny little door and go into, metaphorically, the mother's body, right? And everything inside is magical. All right, so he says we're in a magical field. So again, it's not so much the place, it's what we make of it. You know, it's kind of like, what's that old saying? Life is what you make of it. Well, home is also what you make of it. And so he's talking about being in a magical field, almost like a vibration, an energetic, an intentional space of being intentional and mindful, right? He says when you go into a cathedral today, you are in a magical field, and the men who are in there are not this individual and that individual and another individual. They are in a role. I view this as kind of like the loss of ego, sort of like when you transcend that barrier, you cross over, or the veil is torn, or whatever metaphor you want to use. When you cross over or you step into this place, this holy sanctuary, whatever it is, you check your ego at the door. It's kind of like it just happens, you know, part of it. It's just part of that experience. So I like how he says, and the men who are in there are not this individual and that individual. They are in a role. He says they are the experiences of the energy of nature coming through them. This is an important thing to note. They are the experiences of the energy of nature coming through them, right? And then he expands on that. He says, in a great cathedral such as Notre Dame, I'm probably not going to say this right, Notre Dame de Chartres, our mother church, the mother's body, you're in the magic realm again. The imagery is that of dream. The imagery is that of myth. The imagery is that of reference to transcendence. Reference to transcendence. Let's stop there and talk about it for a minute. All right. So, yeah, let's talk about the etymology of the word home. So I looked it up on the online etymology dictionary, and it said it means a dwelling place, a house, abode. So I feel like in the olden days, they used to use that word dwelling more often than today, right? So in looking at the word dwelling, it also means a house or an abode, but really interesting. The earlier meaning of dwelling in the early 14th century meant stupor, right? Stupor. Delay, procrastination, a staying in a place. Okay, but you see how it's kind of like in a negative light. It's a delay, a procrastination. See, stupor. It sounds more of like a mental thing. Okay, dwelling here. This was so exciting to me. And then we have the Old English dwellin, which is a verb meaning to lead into error, deceive, and mislead. So it's also interesting to note here, to pause and to realize that when we are in isolation, anybody, if you're in isolation long enough, you can literally go crazy. You can lose your mind. So let me tie in just a little excerpt here from this other book I have, Special Relationships. All right, this is going to be on page 34 if you have the booklet. All right, there's a section called Relating to No One, and it says, the course's philosophy of time is a vast topic, well beyond the scope of this booklet, but it is necessary to say some things about it here. The most obvious thing to say at this point is that since the past is gone, if I'm relating to it, I am relating to no one. I am talking to myself. An insane person is someone who has conjured up his own reality and relates to it rather than to reality. This is precisely what we are doing. And then there's quotes from, I believe, the actual book, A Course in Miracles. And he quotes T 231 here. It says, "Thus do they communicate with those who are not there, and it is they who answer them. And no one hears their answers save him who called upon him, and he alone believes they answered him." It's sort of like a state of psychosis, you know, just like all within one's mind. And then it says, "As you look with open eyes upon your world, it must occur to you that you have withdrawn into insanity. You see what is not there, and you hear what makes no sound. You communicate with no one, and you are as isolated from reality as if you were alone in all the universe. In your madness, you overlook reality completely." So, yeah, that's interesting. And sometimes I think there's a fine line between psychosis and spirituality and creativity and imagination. It's sort of like there's just a fine line. So there's a whole lot I could say there. That's why I'm kind of stumbling right this minute over my words. But I would go way off a big huge tangent, and I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying really hard, so I won't. I'll make that a different video. But in fact, I filmed a video, I just didn't post it, about that. Maybe I'll put that together and share with you all. But anyway, that was really interesting to me right there. And so let's tie it all together. Back to another word for home. We talked about one being a dwelling, right? We talked about what it meant to dwell and dwelling, right? Which was so interesting to me. But then there's another word, which is abode, okay? So the etymology of abode from the mid-13th century is action of waiting. The action of waiting. So again, we have with dwelling, or, you know, that's from the Old English word dwelling, meaning now it would be dwelling, a dwelling, meaning delay, procrastination, or stupor, right? And then we have, in contrast, abode, meaning the action of waiting. If you kind of in your mind just picture someone, just, you know, use your imagination, which is great to exercise that, right? I think it is. You just imagine in your mind someone, you know, alone in their home. And you consider the concept of it being a dwelling as being a place of delay and procrastination and stupor, right? And then you contrast that with it being a place of, you know, an abode for this person, which is where they are in the action of waiting. They're not just waiting, they're in the action of waiting. What is the difference? Mindfulness. Mindfulness is the difference, because there's a difference in being stuck in a state of procrastination and delay and stupor, right? Stupor means numbness, insensibility, a state of amazement, sort of like shock, apathy, or torpor, I don't know if I'm saying that right, T-O-R-P-O-R, torpor of mind, which means listlessness. So just kind of like lifelessness, no life force energy, just a dead body, a zombie, just empty, void. That's the dwelling part. But then on the abode side, you have not just someone waiting, but they are taking the action of waiting. Taking action requires being consciously awake and at oneself, right? It requires intention and attention. It's being alive. It requires that life force energy. It requires mindfulness. So interesting. So yeah, abode, from the Old English, abiden, and G.E. Biden. I don't know if it's G. Biden or J. Biden. Really interesting. To wait for. To wait for. Okay. So, yeah. And then I read up on stupor, and I thought, you know, apathy, numbness, listlessness, death. Death is my word. When I think of listlessness, I think of death, because there's nothing driving the vehicle, you know, it's just sort of an empty vessel. So what does this mean in studying these words in reference to home, the place where we reside? It means that mindfulness is everything. It's everything. You know, we're going to be talking about this in a minute, but trauma kind of zaps that from us. It puts us in that state of stupor, of shock, of even the freeze response or fawn, where you're just sort of you almost feel like the theft that has taken place it feels spiritual and energetic. You become very lethargic. Some people lose the will to live. It's just some people just can go crazy, go out of their mind after being gaslit so much. It's just not good. It's not good. Nobody wants to be a zombie. So mindfulness, being at oneself, conscious awareness, it's everything. It's everything. So the last thing I'm going to share from this book is on page 19, they show a picture of this chieftain. It says, here is a Maori chieftain permanently in the role. His whole body is tattooed. He's got a magical body. That is to say, the stained glass windows and incense and all have been imprinted on him. He's in the cathedral all the time, you might say. His life is that of a mythological role. So much for the first crisis. First stage of life, right? That of maturation, from infancy to maturity. We come to the second, which is marriage, right? Where one becomes one member of a twofold being, becoming whole, right? Stepping into your true self, your higher self, the capital S self. So here's the picture of the Maori chieftain. Yeah. And, you know, y'all know I love art. I don't personally have any tattoos, but I don't have anything against them. But I thought that was just kind of a neat message. I had to share it with you all. And yeah, I'm very, very hot. Let me see if I can. I've got my air going. I don't want it to mess up the volume too bad, but it's hot down here in the south. So, okay. So, yeah, we don't have to go to that extreme that the chieftain did, but I'd like to note here that symbolism is powerful. It's powerful. I mean, even Jesus used symbolism, spoken symbolism in parables, you know. I believe there's one verse, actually I know there is, I'm just not real clear on it. I haven't done a deep dive to understand what it means, but I know there's in the Bible where it talks about he's drawing in the sand or writing in the sand. So I don't know if he used art in his life so much, but I know that in the way he taught, that was very artful and creative in sharing, you know, the parables, teaching via parables. So symbolism in general is very powerful, we know. Because technically speaking, what Jesus did was he painted a picture in the minds of his audience that made the lessons digestible. It's like they could cognitively process and get the message through the means of what? Of something familiar to them, right? He had to make everything relatable for them to get the understanding piece of the wisdom he was sharing, right? So, which brings us back to the concept of home. You know, we need a mental point of reference, a mental framework, which is what, you know, our life up till this point has provided us. It has provided this framework, a mental structure, right? A mental house, mental home. It has provided that up till this point. And that serves as our framework to operate from in this world. Familiarity, what we know, right? But if we remain stuck within this framework, either literally in your house or within your mental house, if you remain stuck, you can't grow and you can't evolve. It's pretty clear to me that we are supposed to grow and evolve. Jesus didn't stay in one place as our example, right? If we look at that. And furthermore, he asked his disciples to travel as well. They were always on foot, right? So there's something to be said about moving, about walking, about driving, just putting yourself in a different place, whatever method. Why do we feel so peaceful when we do that? And why do we feel so restored after we've traveled? Think about vacations. What is it that makes that? You might literally put yourself in a different place and do the same things you would do at home. Maybe you're not doing any excursions. You're just eating and looking out, in front of you. And it's but yet it's so transformative. It's so impactful on the spirit and the mind. Sometimes your greatest ideas come from putting yourself in a different place. Sometimes things click into place and stuff you've been trying to figure out for years. You're just in a fog. You're in that stupor at home. But when you change that, when you get out on foot, or you drive, or you take a boat, or you fly, or whatever means of travel, you just get moving, right? And you wind up in a different place. Things start clicking. Things start making sense. It's just easier that way. You have revelations. You have inspiration. You're encouraged. All this stuff starts happening. Why is that? And it is restorative to the spirit. Sometimes you can experience healing because it's all connected. The body, the mind, the spirit. And I've had that happen personally and with my family members too many times. We can just be having a real hard time getting over an illness and go to a different place and better in a day. So there's something to be said about all this, right? So I wrote, why do we feel so peaceful on vacation and restored after? Because I would say progression, right? Not just movement, but progressing is the language of the universe. Movement too is the language of the universe. Everything's constantly moving, even if it's microscopic and tiny like the galaxy, and everything's said to be expanding, at this I guess a tiny rate, or it's barely observable, but everything's constantly moving. And of course we know about the life cycles, the cycles of life, death, life. It's always evolving. That's just the language of the creation, right, of the universe. So what do we do when we are traumatized? We put safety at the forefront of everything. And in so doing, without us realizing it, it becomes our God. And many times it imprisons us. It shifts the spiritual element of the home from being the abode to the dwelling. Or the prison, really. We're not supposed to be afraid of God's design, including the life, death, life cycle. And I'm speaking of that in terms of safety. The Bible says don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body. But instead, what we need to fear is the one who can kill the spirit. Which is why, a lot of times, you hear the saying, and sometimes it's in tattoos on people and stuff, like the only person I fear is God. And shouldn't it be that way? The Bible says so, We're not supposed to fear death. So, or the cycles, because again, that's part of the grand design. And relaxing into that means living a life of faith and letting go, Control is just an illusion anyway. We're just fooling ourselves into thinking we're safe. And I'm thinking about I know home feels safe. I know it does. And in some ways it is. But I'm thinking about Donnie Darko, this movie. I don't know if you've seen it. It's pretty interesting. It's different. I like different movies. I like movies that make me think. But he's, you know, in his home, and this huge plane part, the engine or something just crashes through, you know, the ceiling right onto him and his bed and everything. Of course, there's like in the movie, there's an excursion where he avoids that, and he gets to live out what might have been if he had avoided that. And then he sees the difference in what would have been. Because again, everything has an impact on everything else, right? The law of cause and effect. Ripples. But we're not supposed to fear. We're not supposed to live in fear. There's all kind of verses about that too. If I can find some, I'll drop them in the description. But we're supposed to rest in love. And God is love. And that means a life of faith. So we have to stop idolizing the physical. We have to stop making that our God, consciously or unconsciously. And we have to, therefore, stop allowing our home and even our body, our physical body, to be our prison. You can't escape danger. Like in my example with the movie, you really can't, ultimately. And I would say, even if you do temporarily, or you think you're doing it, you know, or maybe you really are for a short time, my question to you is this: at what cost? At what cost? You know, if you get to the end of your life and you feel like, you know, safety was your number one priority, is that in alignment with God's priority for your life? You know, you may ask yourself at the end of your life, did you ever really live? When we operate from safety, we are rooted in an attachment mindset. And this keeps us stagnant and constantly disappointed. Because why? Because everything changes. And everything is supposed to change, I would say, except here for commitment. I'm of the belief of, I believe in monogamous, committed relationships. But other than that, the nature of the universe, right, is meant to evolve and change. And I think that when you're in those committed relationships, you do that together. It's the way it's supposed to be anyway, right? So then on the other hand, we know that sometimes trauma causes flight. So trauma can cause a person to kind of turn into a hermit, you know, and trauma can also cause a person to do the exact opposite, way on the other side of the spectrum, right? Just constantly on the go, literally someone who can never just be and sit still. And these are people that they have a need for constant distractions, right? So there's a difference, I would say, in a person who's thirsty or hungry for distractions to cope with trauma, right? Because they're essentially running away from the trauma. There's a difference in someone like that and someone who has a thirst for life. And sometimes I wonder, if you are stuck in trauma, but you're not consciously aware of it yet, might you view someone who has a thirst for life as someone who is thirsty for distractions? You know, we have to remember that we are limited in our scope of understanding, right? We're limited as opposed, or in reference to our framework, our current paradigm structure. You know, I think it's important and something to remember that God had his disciples always moving, always on the go, you know. So yes, having a thirst for life, what a beautiful thing. And I've recently found a channel. I think I've shared one of her videos in the past, but it's really a perfect example of having that spirit of just loving life and wanting to experience life and living in the moment. And it's called Zetster's Lab. It's really cool. I'll drop a link again in the description for you all. I really like watching her content. She just seems to be a beautiful soul to me. And so I just encourage you to check out her channel. But and really all of my subscriptions are public, and I have some wonderful channels out there that I love to watch. I enjoy YouTube, and so feel free to take a look at my list, and I hope that you are able to find some new content creators that you resonate with, you know. So yes. So again, in this special relationships book, there's something that's referenced as the holy instant. The holy instant, and I'll read that with you all. It's just really short. It's on page 35 if you have the booklet. What is a holy instant? It is a moment when healing occurs. It may be experienced partially and so hardly noticed, or it may be experienced more totally, in which case you will be lifted out of normal sense perception into a transcendental realm. And if you enter into it completely, it will be the last instant of time that you spend in time. I thought that was really interesting. So recalling that the magical space that Joseph Campbell talked about, you know, and in this book it's called the Transcendental Realm, right? But again, there's a fine line between that and just living in your own reality, your own fantasy land in your world, you know, because you're so out of touch with reality. There's a balance required, you know, mindfulness. So, yeah, Transcendental Realm. This is what I believe to be our true home. I think this is our true home. So let's look at to transcend. To transcend. So with transcend, we have trans, which means across or beyond, and we have scandere or scandere, meaning to climb. Well, so to climb across or beyond, to make it to the other side. So remember that, to make it to the other side. All of the myths and fairy tales and folklore and legends, they all talk about crossing something, a river, a bridge, going through a forest, climbing a mountain. There's always a journey, and there's typically an important part that the main character, the hero, has to cross a threshold or cross something very significant and symbolic, right? So the point being that the goal is to make it through or make it across, to make it to the other side. When this clicks, you're never going to hear the joke about the chicken crossing the road the same ever again. So just something to note, right? Yeah. So to be in the world but not of it. The Bible talks about that. Let's do a quick yet deep dive, okay? To be in the world but not of it. When you look at the roots, all the root parts of the word of, it actually means away from. So let's replace that word and look at it two different ways. To be in the world but not from it, which I think is how a lot of us view that, you know, teaching. And I'm not saying it's not true, but I think it's multi-layered, because here we have, in looking at the roots of the word of, to be in the world but not away from it. What would that mean? To be in the world and yet not away from it. It seems like it doesn't make sense, like it's a reiteration, you know, just doubling the message. But why? Why? Because you can be in the world and away from it. Here, you can be out of your mind instead of mindful and present and awake and conscious, and not a zombie and not in a stupor, right? You can be, or in a stupor, you can be physically here but mentally gone. So that was huge for me, to be in the world but not of it, but not away from it. To be in the world and yet to not be lured away with thoughts which take you totally away. Or I would say even old beliefs, anything that imprisons the mind. You know, we're told time and again to take your thoughts captive. So we're supposed to be present, both physically and mentally, right? With our body and our mind. So we're supposed to not be swept away and essentially be an unconscious passenger to your thoughts or your memories, right? To be mindful and awake and be able to truly experience life is what it means to be alive. So I hope that you enjoyed the message today. I hope that it was encouraging, inspiring. I hope it got the wheels turning, most of all, which is always my intention, first and foremost. And I just hope you really enjoyed it. I thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.